Now that Lauri Markkanen has been re-signed by the Utah Jazz, it puts a check mark in the book. That makes a lot of sense. They can still be a bottom 5 team in the league, and I'll probably do a separate video about that later on, but the point is they have one of their center building blocks still remaining. Another thing that has been floating around that I want to address now that I really held off because I wanted to see how the Lauri Markkanen drama was going to play out is the potential of adding Brandon Ingram at some point. Now, he is entering the final year of his deal, and that makes a lot of teams interested in his services. But I'm not the most optimistic. I'll tell you why in this video. If you're new to the channel, my name is Wraith Hoops. Go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications if you're into NBA basketball or you happen to be a Utah Jazz fan. I do this almost every single day. That being said, let's go ahead and get into this one. To put things simply, I'm not the highest on Brandon Ingram. In my head, for some reason, he's been 30 for the past 2 years just because he's been the same stagnant player. And this is not a Brandon Ingram hit piece at all. If you're familiar with my content, you understand that I'm a big numbers guy, and that usually makes me feel one way or another way about a particular player, place, or situation. And it's no different with him. But for him, it's a money thing. I do like what he brings to teams. He's not necessarily the greatest defender, but he's a pretty decent defender. Offensively, he shoots modest percentages from the field. In the regular season, we saw him get exposed against OKC with Zion Williamson being out, and things just haven't really turned out to be the best since then, if I'm going to be quite honest. I'm not a Brandon Ingram hater. I do not have a strong distaste for Brandon Ingram. I just don't think that his value is as high as his camp and himself personally feel like it should be. For reference, he's entering the final year of a 5-year, $158.3 million max contract, and that was warranted, in my personal opinion, because you had a world where he ended up winning the most improved player. He's been an all-star once, and the 2019-2020 season, I believe, was the year of his most improved player award, and so it made sense for him to secure that level of bag. In hindsight, it was a pretty decent spend if you are the New Orleans Pelicans. He has, by and large, been a pretty positive player, though he has, honestly, in my opinion, constantly proven that he can never be a number 1 option. You can still have number 2s and sometimes number 3s that are worthy of max money as long as they are enough of a game changer. But going forward, I don't think that he is enough. Now, there's a lot of teams that have been interested in Brandon Ingram's services, but they're not willing to pay the steep price that the Pelicans are hoping to get in return for him. They have outwardly come and said they don't want to give $200 million to the guy. They love him as a player. They would like to retain him, but they're not willing to give him a max contract. And I'm in agreement. And I would like to think that most NBA executives, hopefully in theory, all of them, feel like he's not worth $200 million across 4 years. But, you know, it's always up until interpretation of different people. He is eligible to sign a 4-year, $207.8 million extension at any time between right now and the end of the season at June 30th, or he can test free agency next offseason and potentially get a contract of about 5 years, $269.1 million. He's not worth that. His numbers don't lead me to feel that way. The way I watched him play in the playoffs didn't make me feel that way. And I'm going to do my best to articulate that to you guys using what he's put together with his resume as of late, the logic behind it, and then also toning in a little bit on his metrics from the playoffs last year, because honestly, it was ugly. Over the past 3 seasons, he's played 55 games, 45 games, and last year, finally, 64 games. So if you're one of those people that believes that Lauri Markkanen has actually been injured all of the games that we ended up sitting him out last year, then you would believe that they're really not going to share the court that much. Similarly to how he rarely shares the court, I guess, with Zion Williamson. But I believe that Brandon Ingram is objectively much more injury prone than Lauri Markkanen is. In that same vein, looking at last year and the year before, he's played around 34-ish, 33-ish minutes each season. Last year, he averaged 20.8 points, 5.1 rebounds, 5.7 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.6 blocks, and he shot 49.2% from the field to go along with 35.5% from three-point range on 3.8 attempts, which is pretty solid. And he also was 80% from the free throw line. Those are solid percentages. It's not terrific from three-point range considering he only shot 3.8, but when you look back to his first and second year when he was with the Pelicans, he shot 39.1% and 38.1% on 6.2 and 6.1 attempts per game. So the shooting prowess was there. And mind you, he played in 62 and 61 games respectively. So it was a very decent sample size of three-pointers taken. All in all, he ended up tapering off, taking 4.1, then 3.6, then up to 3.8 and 3.7 over the past 2 years, shooting 32.7% on the season that he shot 4.1. He shot 39% on the one that he shot 3.6, and then it just kind of tapered off to the mid-30s. So really, we don't know how efficient of a three-point shooter he is. I believe that a healthy diet of more wide open ones where he doesn't have to create the shot himself might do his percentages a little bit better. And I do have faith that he could return to form and shoot a little bit into that higher range, but he's clearly not the same shooter that Lauri Markkanen is. And some of that could be the fact that, he's 6'8", 6'9", compared to Lauri being 7 foot. So just by default, Lauri is going to have an easier time shooting over defenders than Brandon Ingram is. That is a fair argument to have. But at the same time, I'm not really the most heavy about it, because if you look back to the previous season, he averaged 24.7 points per game. He had 5.5 rebounds, 5.8 assists. He had 0.7 steals, 0.4 blocks. He ended up shooting 48.4% from the field. He also had 39% from three. Mind you, it was on 3.6 attempts, and he shot 88.2% from the free throw line on 6 attempts compared to his 80% this year on 4.8 attempts. So all in all, despite being healthier, he was a little bit less efficient. And even if we go back a year before that, where he played 55 games, he played 34 minutes, had 22.7 points, 5.8 rebounds, 5.6 assists. He had 0.6 steals, 0.5 blocks. He shot 46.1% from the field. He ended up shooting 32.7% from three on 4.1 attempts. And then he was 82.6% from the free throw line on 5.9 attempts. I'm not saying he can't shoot. I'm not saying he can't score. But over the past 3 years, he's both been mediocrely healthy and been mediocrely growing his game, because it hasn't grown. Now, that said, right, I said he's not a bad player because he's averaging on 3 straight seasons 20 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists on decent efficiency. So he's clearly getting something right. And then he also middles around like 2.5 turnovers per game. So he's not bad, right? He can play make to a certain sense. He can create offense for himself in a certain sense. And to be honest, the Pelicans just haven't had the most spacing. They've had lineups with, Valanciunas. They've had lineups with Zion Williamson. And we both know neither of those people are really great floor spacers. CJ McCollum on his own isn't going to do much. Now, you do have guys like Herb Jones and other pieces that are very impressive talents, and they just brought in DeJounte Murray. So if there's a year where he needs to take a step up because there's another offensive piece that's going to allow him to be successful individually, then this is going to be the year, and there will be no other opportunity like it. But I just don't know if he will. And if I'm the Utah Jazz, I need to see what he can do. Because if he can't, there's no point in trading for him. And the fact is, whatever team ends up trading for him, because there is a realistic possibility that he does get traded, before next offseason. And if he gets traded before this season even starts, it would very much perplex me, because do you think that you can really re-sign him? Are you willing to pay the max extension? I don't think there's going to be a lot of teams that will, especially with the new CBA deal in place. There's not a lot of people that are willing to go over and just overspend the cap and hit the hard cap, or be having to deal with the second apron just over him, over Brandon Ingram. And that's not an indictment on saying, oh, he's terrible, because, again, got to keep disclaiming it. He's not a bad player. He's a very solid NBA player. Like I said, he's an average to slightly above average defender. Offensively, he's pretty efficient. He can do a lot of things pretty decently. But he's like a jack of all trades. A jack of all trades is good at many things, but he's not the king of any one individual attribute on the court. And if you just need somebody that can kind of fill in gaps, then yes, you would like him. But you also wouldn't pay a premium for a guy that's going to be okay at multiple things, but great at nothing. That just doesn't really make sense. And if we look at what he did in last year's playoffs, we wouldn't really, feel the best. And to put it mildly, right? Last year, they played 2 playing games, and then they had a first-round exit against the Oklahoma City Thunder. In the 2 playing games, he played and started, obviously, in both of them, played roughly 31 minutes. He averaged 17.5 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. He had no steals. He had 0.5 blocks. He shot 43.8% from the field on 16 field goal attempts. He shot 66.7% from three-point range on 1.5 attempts. So he was 2 of 3. And he was 2.5 for 2.5 from the free throw line. So he hit all of his free throws. All in all, it was a solid performance in both of those games. He did average 3.5 turnovers. So he had 7 turnovers across those 2 games, which was less than desirable. But, it happens. It's a play-in. But he got to the playoffs. So with that performance in mind, right? 44% from the field, 2 of 3 from three-point range. Those aren't bad. But when you take 16 field goal attempts and you only shoot 44%, you scratch your head a little bit, right? He did himself crazy in that first round matchup. Mind you, it was a sweep. They could not buy anything, and when Zion Williamson went down, the whole dream fell into shambles because a long-time siege in McCollum, he was just unable to get anything started. He was capable of proving that he can't deal with size. Lou Dort had him in a torture chamber. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had him in a torture chamber. Everybody was doing this man greasy, and he could stop nothing. He couldn't buy a bucket half the time. But if he's a decent player, how could he not buy a bucket, you might ask? I'm going to tell you. In 4 games, he started all 4 of them. He played 36.3 minutes per game. He averaged 14.3 points. He had 4.5 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 1 steal, 1.3 blocks. So the defensive intensity was there. I'm going to go ahead and say that right now. The defensive intensity was there. But you heard me when I said 14 points, right? Zion wasn't there to take shots away from him in that. Still only 14 points. But why did he shoot and only have 14 points? Well, he took less shots, right? Yes, he did. He took 13.8 shots, but he shot 34.5% from the field on those shots. He made less than 5 of those 14 shot attempts. He was also 0.5 for 2, so he was really 2 of 8 from three-point range, 25%. And then he did shoot well from the free throw line. He was 4.8 attempts per game. He shot 89.5%. So in that metric, free throws was really the only thing that he did really well. From a turnover perspective, he toned it down. Remember that he had 7 in those first 2 playing games. He ended up averaging 2.3, which is lower than his overall season average, which was 2.5. So that was better. But overall, the shooting was terrible. 14 field goal attempts, and he was hitting less than 5 of them. That's something that you can't allow to happen. And if you're supposed to be a pseudo or potential rising number 1 option, you can't do that. If people believe in you that much and you think you're a max contract player, you cannot go in the playoffs and play like that. At all. It cannot happen. If it happened to Kevin Durant, if it happened to LeBron James, heck, I think as little as people criticize Devin Booker, if it happened to Devin Booker, he would be getting cooked. There's players all across the league. If Embiid did it, he would have got fried. If Giannis did it, Giannis would have got fried. All these guys demand max money. And there's quite a few others. You have your Jalen Brunsons, even though he took that massive pay cut. By the way, shout out to the power of friendship because he's going ballistics over there with those guys. But there's so many guys that are capable of producing at the highest level of basketball, and they demand max contracts. A 4-game sample size of, excuse my language, ass and more ass isn't going to demand that. That's not how it works. And if that's the last body of work, you're sliding across the table saying, hey, pay me. I'm worth it. And those are the biggest 4 games you have because the only other time you've been in the playoffs was the 2021-2022 season. It's not really hitting. And back then, it was worth it because, mind you, in that time period, he played in 6 games. Now, obviously, it was over with. But they also had 2 playing games. And the 2 playing games, listen to how different these numbers sound. It's almost as if it feels like he regressed, right? He played in both of those games 36 minutes, 28.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, no steals, no blocks. He shot 62.5% from the field on 20 field goal attempts. He only attempted 2 3-pointers. He missed both of them, but that didn't matter, right? He shot 70% from the free throw line. He had 10 overall field goals from the free throw line, and he hit 7 of those across those 2 games. Very solid, right? Very solid. He did have 2 turnovers per game, which is the lowest across the sample size of that, right? But it was 2 playing games, right? You go on to into the actual playoff game, 6-game series, you end up losing. Oh man, he must have played just as bad as he did last year, right? No, it was night and day. He literally almost had double as many points. He played in all 6 games, started in all 6. He played 39.3 minutes. He scored 27 points, 6.2 rebounds, 6.2 assists, zero point 0.7 steals, 0.3 blocks. He shot 47.5% from the field on 19.7 field goal attempts per game. He shot 40.7% from 3 on 4.5 attempts. He shot 83% from the free throw line on 7.8 attempts. He was that boy. He did admittedly have 3.8 turnovers, but the efficiency was there. His true shooting percentage that year was 68.4% across 6 games. This past season, and you could argue that OKC was a more difficult matchup. He doesn't deal with size well. Lou Dort was giving him a lot of fits. But 45% true shooting, that's a 14-point difference, basically. It's not what you want. If this was BI from 21, 22, asking for this money, people wouldn't think it's that crazy. They lost in the first round, but it went 6 games. He played out of his mind. Defensively, he wasn't it wasn't as abrasive how good he was defensively that year compared to last year. That's fair to say. But people don't pay for defense. I love defense, but people don't pay to watch defense. If you go to a game, you're not going to watch people score 70 and 80 points as a team as a whole. You're trying to see 90 to 120-ish. You want to see it. They want to see him go at it, go back and forth. And he just wasn't that guy. At least this past year. So if that's the thing that everybody's trying to slide across the table and say, oh, the Utah Jazz, they need this. Any NBA team would be happy to have him on their team. They should trade for him immediately. He's only 27. He's about to enter his prime. What prime? The past 3 seasons, he's been the same person. Admittedly, it's a pretty decent person, but the efficiency hasn't gotten significantly better. He's still averaging right there at 5.5-ish rebounds and assists. And his points have gone down each year. So what is the max contract? What is drawing it out of people? And that's the thing that I don't understand. And again, I don't want to make this a hit piece on Brandon Ingram because overall, like I said, he's a good NBA player. He's a solid, good NBA player. He's just not a max contract NBA player. And that's okay. I don't want it to look like, oh, because he's not averaging 38 and 7, he's not that guy. He's cool. That's all he is. And I was recognizing his lack of growth overall over the past few years. And yes, the Pelicans haven't really been, a playoff team. They haven't been looking for anything spectacular. They haven't had their eyes aimed at the moon trying to shoot for the stars. Yes, that is true. But that shouldn't stop him from being himself or slightly improving some aspect of his game. I mean, for Pete's sake, if you're not going to be a good NBA team, at least be a good NBA player, work on your game, justify why things happen. For example, if you're a Utah Jazz fan, you admit that you watched last season and in the middle of the year, things looked really good. They looked like a competent team. After the trade deadline, things fell apart. They sat Lowry a lot of games. Injuries came up. They started playing a lot of the young guys. It happens, right? But also Lowry's percentages started falling after the trade deadline. And why was that? It wasn't because he was taking the same shots. It's because you took away some of the pieces that he was using. You switched him out with young guys. And then Lowry was also actually working on his shooting prowess, creating offense for himself. That's why his three-point percentage dropped below 40. But that's also why, if you look at his, all of probably every 3 except for 2 or 3 of them, I believe, were assisted threes. Meaning that he does most of his damage off of the catch. So in that last part of the year, when the team was complete cheeks and they were just losing to everybody, Larry Markkanen said, you know what? I'm going to work on my game. And he started putting the ball on the deck more. And it didn't look great. Sometimes it looked horrid. But he, who was already a elite level shooting big, said, I need to add something to my bag. And then since these games, it doesn't matter because we need to lose anyways to make it worthwhile when the draft comes around. I'm going to work on my game. And I personally believe that coming into next season, we're going to see him work on it a little bit more. It won't be great. I'm not sitting here saying, oh, we're going to have point guard Lowry. We're not going to have point forward Lowry. That's not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen. But Dirk Nowitzki isn't going to be the highest mountain for him to reach. He already has the shooting. He can kind of put the ball on the deck. I saw some growth, but I didn't see enough. But at least there was something going on there. When you watch Brandon Ingram, he's the same guy, came in and came out. When they're losing, he's the same guy. When they're winning, he's the same guy. He does have some remarkable performances to his name. But if I put a gun to the back of your head and I said, name top 5 BI performances, we'd be sitting here for a minute now, wouldn't we? But again, he's a good NBA player. He's just not somebody that makes me wow and pop all the time. He's just cool. And that's perfectly fine. I don't think that there's going to be a team in free agency that's going to end up paying him that max contract. I don't think anybody's going to trade for him and accept all this stuff on top of everything. It just doesn't make sense. It's not feasible. And he's going to have to come to terms with that. Now, again, we could be wrong, right? He could come out this year, say this is my contract year, because it is, and say, I need to ball out. I need to show I'm him. Forget Zion, forget DeJounte, forget everybody, forget Herb, forget all these boys on the team. It's me. It's me. I got to show them I'm worth keeping. I got to show them I'm worth millions. I got to show them they should slap 50 M's on the table in front of me at the beginning of every year. And he can go out and ball. He can give us 25. He can give us 25, 7, and 6. I would call that improvement. 25, 7, and 6, I'd call that improvement. 47, 48, 49% from the field. You know what I'm saying? Closer to that 40% from three-point range that he was shooting back when he first joined the Pelicans. I would say, oh, B.I. moving different. Get a couple highlight blocks, a couple steals into slams, get a little windmill going. Let me see him on, all the sports pages, all the ESPN articles. Let me get a little bit of that love. And yes, it's a small market team, but he should be able to show out. We should be able to say, oh, the media just doesn't talk about him, but he's really like that for real. But we don't, because it's not the case right now. And it could very well change. And I do hope that it does change. If he does come into this next season and he does take that approach to the game and he takes every match up personally and every game he's getting after it, then you could make that argument. And the question then becomes, okay, well, once we have him signed to this contract, then he comes over here, or if you're the Pelicans and he stays, is he going to keep that fire in his belly or is he going to regress? Is he going to go back to 25-5? Good floor, but not a great ceiling for a max contract player, right? And if I'm the Utah Jazz and I tank this year, I'm going to watch Brandon Ingram. I want to see how he plays, but I'm not going to offer a max contract. That just makes no sense. When he hits free agency, under the assumption that no other team decides to trade for him as a one-year rental or whatever the case may be, or thinks they can retain him, I'm going to see how Lowry feels about it. I'm going to see how Colin Sexton feels about it. I want to see who we can get in the draft. And then once that happens, if he's still on the market, he's still looking for a team, he's fielding offers, I'm going to slide an offer sheet across. It's not going to be $50 million a year. It's not going to be close. Some people would say he's in the ballpark of OG Anunoby. I think OG Anunoby does a lot better as a utility personnel piece, I suppose. Defensively, he's better. Offensively, he's more niche. He shoots better from what I need and what I would like if the Utah Jazz can get an ideal point guard fit. Keontae George loves to shoot, but I think he's more of a 2 guard than a 1. If Colin Sexton can continue to elevate his playmaking and say he averages 6, 7 assists this next season, per 36 minutes, I'll say, because I think that the rookies are going to get a lot more time and Isaiah Collier is going to get some growth. If that happens, Lowry still shoots well. You go into this offseason, B.I. still available. You get an Ace Bailey, a Cooper Flagg type caliber player, somebody, anyone 1 through 7 really, in next year's draft. And you got that 3-headed monster. And B.I. still on the table, I'm sliding an offer across the table. I don't know if it's going to be OG Anunoby type money, but you could argue that, Brandon Ingram's been an all-star before. He's proven that he can do it. And OG hasn't been one, but he's averaging $42.5 million a year now on his contract extension. Y'all not going to pay him? I feel like we would have to pay him in that ballpark. Somewhere closer to $40 million would make me more comfortable. I'm not going to pay him more than OG Anunoby because when this comes to a late game situation or when it comes to playoffs, unless he does something this year to change my mind and remind me of who 2021, 2022 Brandon Ingram was, or 2019, 2020 Brandon Ingram was, I'm not buying it because they look like night and day players. If you go and look at the tape, you can pull up a highlight tape. Don't even just watch regular game tape. Pull up a highlight tape. They're not the same guy. And if you look at the plays from the past 3 years, he's been the exact same guy. So there's no growth. Most players reach their prime at 28 and afterwards. Where's the prime? This looks like the prime right here. He's very stable. A very stable floor, but there is no ceiling. The floor is a ceiling, as Michael Jordan said, in my eyes. But I've talked you guys head off enough. Comment your thoughts down below. Maybe I'm bugging a little bit. Maybe I'm a little harsh after looking over the numbers while talking to you guys a little bit more. But I just don't think he's worth a contract that is a max. I think he is worthy of testing the waters with, and I would definitely slide an offer across the table regardless at the end of next season if he's still available. But I'm just not paying him max money. And I think if the Utah Jazz added him for max money, that would be one of the stupidest moves we could have done. But that's just my thoughts personally. Let me know what you guys think. As I said, it's your boy Wraith Hoops. Thanks for tuning in this video. Go ahead and like the video, subscribe, turn on post notifications. Like always, donate, become a member to help support the content. And good morning, good evening, and good night, no matter where you're on the globe watching. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.